Welcome back! It's time to talk about Hamlet, Act 2. So when we last left off Hamlet, in the end of Act 1, Hamlet was just talking with the ghost of his father, and he just swore that he would rush to revenge. In fact, he's going to rush to revenge with wings as swift as meditations or the thoughts of love. Turns out Hamlet is not quite as quick as he mentioned, and instead of rushing off and killing Polonius right away, he kind of piddles around. In a not unfamiliar turn of events, our young hero, instead of doing what he's supposed to do when it's hard, kills time. He procrastinates, he talks to his girlfriend, he starts acting crazy and goofing off, checks his Twitter account, watches Netflix, anything at all not to have to murder his uncle. No, that doesn't sound familiar at all. Act 2 opens again in the home of Polonius, where we see Polonius talking to a servant whose name is Ronaldo. And he's talking about his son Laertes, who we saw go off to school in the last act. Now, if you remember what we said about parenting in the last act, we have an interesting relationship between Polonius and Laertes versus Polonius and his daughter Ophelia. Polonius encouraged his son and gave him a blessing multiple times. He seemed very proud of him, and yet on the other hand, he's rather harsh with his daughter. Well, here we see another aspect of Polonius as he's thinking about his son. The first thing we see is that he's sending Ronaldo to Laertes to bring him some notes and some money. Hey, it's always nice to get a care package while you're at college. But then Polonius goes on and says, before you visit him, inquire about him. But then Polonius says, before you visit him, inquire about his behavior. And Ronaldo's like, of course, yeah, I'm gonna make sure he's got a good reputation over there. But Polonius has a very interesting strategy for checking up on his son. Look you, sir, inquire me first what danskers are in Paris, and how and who, what means and where they keep, what company, at what expense, and finding by this encompassment and drift of question that they do know my son, come you more nearer than your particular demands will touch it. Take you as 'twere some distant knowledge of him, as thus, I know his father and his friends, and impart him. Do you mark this, Ronaldo? And impart him. But you may say, not well, but if it be he I mean, he's very wild, addicted to so-and-so, and there put on him what forgeries you please. Marry, none so rank as may dishonor him, take heed of that. But sir, such wanton, wild, unusual slips as our companions noted and most known to youth and liberty. And when Ronaldo's like, you mean like gambling? Polonius says, aye, or drinking, fencing, swearing, quarreling, drabbing, you may go so far. So he's asking Ronaldo to go to Paris, where his son is, and ask around and be like, oh, so what young men are around? Oh, yeah. And when he hears about Laertes, to say, oh, you know, I think I know who his family is. Isn't he the one who does? And then start an ugly rumor about Laertes. Oh, he's quite the gambler. Oh, he's quite the fighter. He even goes so far as to say drabbing, which is pursuing prostitutes. Ronaldo's pretty shocked by this, and he's like, that would dishonor him, I'm pretty sure. But Polonius says, faith, no, as you may season it in the charge, you must not put another scandal in him that he is open to incontinency. That's not my meaning, but breathes his fault so quaintly that they may seem to be the taints of liberty, the flash and outbreak of a fiery mind, a savageness in unreclaimed blood of general assault. So Polonius is starting rumors about his son in the town, rumors that are even pretty dark, but framing it all by saying, oh, you know, the way boys will be boys. What kind of parent does this? And Ronaldo doesn't get it. Why in the world would you do this? And Polonius explains in short that by suggesting that you've heard bad things about this young man, then the person who's listening to it will say, oh yes, I saw that young man doing fill in the blank. And you'll catch the carp of truth, according to Polonius. For a babbling old fool, he's pretty sneaky. What he doesn't seem to realize is that starting a rumor about someone usually doesn't bring you closer to the truth, but rather farther away. In fact, you'll wind up spreading bad things about Laertes to the point where he's going to get a bad name. And in the usual creeping kind of way, Polonius thinks that it's perfectly fine for young men to do a lot of bad things, as long as you can brush it off as them just being young and wild. Not terribly far off from the treatment of young men in our culture. Yet if Ophelia even accepts a love note from Hamlet, she's going to dishonor him. There's also this delightfully funny moment when Polonius loses his train of thought in the middle of what he's saying because he keeps rambling. He closes with you in this consequence, good sir, or so, or friend, or gentleman, according to the phrase or the addition of man and country. And then, sir, does, what was I about to say? By the mass, I was about to say something. Where did I leave? In any case, once Ronaldo goes off to start rumors about his son and bring him a care package. Thanks, Dad. In comes Ophelia, and Ophelia is not feeling very well right now. She has been scared out of her mind by Hamlet. Now, Hamlet's acting really weird. He's dressed up in this really bizarre costume, and he rushes in at Ophelia, and he stares at her for a moment, and then he sort of walks away. It's a little creepy. Why is he acting so weird? Well, we have some evidence for that in the previous scene. Hamlet told his friends that he might think it meet to put an antic disposition on. In other words, to act a little crazy. He also noted that he can put on one face and be something else on the inside. So Hamlet's going to try on a facade. Now there's also an argument that potentially Hamlet is really crazy, because he acts pretty strange here. Is it possible that the death of his father, the quick marriage of his mother, the fact that his stepdad is a murderer, and the fact that this ghost is expecting him to kill someone is all going to his head? Sure, it's quite possible. I mean, he's definitely under duress. But does that mean he's out of control? I don't think so. Most of the time, he seems to know what he's doing, even if he's acting pretty weird. After Ophelia describes his crazy outfit and behavior to Polonius, Polonius says, "Come, go with me, I will seek the king. This is the very ecstasy of love, whose violent property fordoes itself, and leads the will to desperate undertakings as oft as any passion under heaven that does afflict our natures. I am sorry. What, have you given him any hard words of late?" "No, good my lord, but as you did command, I did repel his letters and denied his access to me." "Yeah, I only stopped answering his texts because you told me to, Dad." "That hath made him mad. I am sorry that with better heed and judgment I had not quoted him. I feared he did but trifle, and meant to rack thee. But beshrew my jealousy by heaven, it is as proper to our age to cast beyond ourselves in our opinions, as it is common for the younger sort to lack discretion." So Polonius thinks he's got Hamlet pegged now. It's really that Hamlet is in love with Ophelia, and he was cut off by her, and therefore he's gone crazy. Polonius goes to report this to the king. Awfully nice that he first of all chews his daughter out, tells her not to ever talk to her boyfriend again, and then when this happens, comes around and says, "Well, look, you drove him crazy, didn't you?" Poor Ophelia. Scene 2, which is a really long scene. In fact, this scene could really be divided into multiple sections. Why do we spend so much time in one scene moving really from one group of characters to another, to another, to another, instead of breaking it up into individual scenes? I don't know. Here's one possible interpretation. Hamlet is supposed to be rushing to revenge, and yet he's not. He's stalling. Yet the rest of the world seems to be moving pretty quick around him. Instead of casually marching between scenes, the whole scene just keeps moving past Hamlet while he tries to figure out what he ought to do. It opens with the king and queen again in court, and this time they have two new courtiers whose names are Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are these delightful old friends of Hamlet's who are pretty flat characters. We're going to see zero development in them. Now there is a wonderful play written by Tom Stoppard called Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, and it's an exploration of the flatness of these characters, the fact that they seem so trapped in their role, so trapped by fate. It's a delightful play, and I'll talk about it a little bit more later on. In any case, the king and queen have called Rosencrantz and Guildenstern because of their friendship with Hamlet, in order for them to spy on Hamlet and figure out why he's acting so weird. Now, he was already acting weird, right? He was all mopey, and now he's acting even more strange. And they're very concerned about it. They're happy to do anything they can to help the king and queen, and the king and queen thank them. One funny point is the fact that the king says, "Thanks, Rosencrantz and gentle Guildenstern," and the queen immediately afterwards says, "Thanks, Guildenstern and gentle Rosencrantz," which seems to indicate that the two characters are basically the same person. It's possible here that the king has gotten them mixed up, but there's really no correction on this ever. In the Tom Stoppard play, even Rosencrantz and Guildenstern can't always remember which one is which. After Rosencrantz and Guildenstern exit, in comes the ambassadors from Norway. So in the last act, we sent these ambassadors off to talk to old Uncle Norway to straighten young Fortinbras out. Before they talk to them, Polonius nudges the king and says, "Hey, I think I figured out why Hamlet's crazy." After we talk to the ambassadors. And the queen very wisely says, I doubt it is no other but the main, his father's death and our o'er-hasty marriage. So Ambassador Voltimand says, hey, wonderful news, we talked to old Norway, he didn't know what his nephew was doing, and so he told him, don't you fight against the Danes. Why don't you go fight the Polish instead? And young Fortinbras promised not to fight us, and therefore we're going to let his whole army march through our country on their way to Poland. Hang on, this guy was just about to invade your country. And because he promised his bedrid, impotent uncle that he's not going to, you all are going to open your borders and let him march armed through? That doesn't seem like a good idea to me. But Claudius is like, yeah, totally, let him in! Wait a second. Denmark's not on the way to Poland. Woo, foreign policy! Doesn't seem like the sort of thing old King Hamlet would have done. So Polonius now is going to explain why he thinks Hamlet is crazy, and he does so in the most complicated and roundabout way. My liege and madam, to expostulate what majesty should be, what duty is, why day is day, night night, and time is time, were nothing but to waste night, day, and time. Therefore, since brevity is the soul of wit, and tediousness the limbs and outward flourishes, I will be brief. And then he goes on to be as wordy as possible. He can't be brief to save his life. The queen a couple times interrupts and is like, more matter and less art. Stop running your fancy tongue and just tell us what it is. Spit it out. That he is mad, 'tis true, 'tis pity, and pity 'tis true. A foolish figure, but farewell it, for I will use no art. Mad let us grant him then, and now remains that we find out the cause for this effect, or rather say, the cause of this defect. For this defective comes by cause, thus it remains, and the remainder thus or pen. Finally, he brings out the point that he has a daughter, and that he thinks Hamlet is madly in love with her, emphasis on the madly, and demonstrates this by reading all of the love letters that Hamlet gave to Ophelia, in front of Ophelia. That's not awkward. Not sure how many of you want your parents reading your personal love letters out loud, in public, to the parents of your boyfriend, as they discuss what you've done with your boyfriend. Seriously, this might be the most awkward parent exchange ever. And to make matters worse, he comments on the phrasing. To the celestial, to my soul's idol, to the most beautified Ophelia. Now that's an ill phrase, a vile phrase. Beautified is a vile phrase. But she'll hear, thus, in her excellent white bosom these, etc. Doubt thou the stars are fire, doubt that the sun doth move, doubt truth to be a liar, but never doubt I love. So not only is he reading these letters publicly, but he's making fun of them at the same time. And the king's like, well, but how did she respond? And Polonius points out that he felt it was his duty, political duty, not to overstep his place, and therefore told his daughter not to respond to Hamlet. No, I went round to work, and my young mistress thus I did bespeak, Lord Hamlet is a prince out of thy star, this must not be. And then I prescripts gave her that she should lock herself from his resort, admit no messengers, receive no tokens, which done, she took the fruits of my advice, and he repelled, a short tale to make, fell into a sadness, then into a fast, thence into a watch, thence into a weakness, thence into a lightness, and by this declension into the madness wherein he now raves, and we all mourn for. The king and queen are not completely convinced, but it's plausible. Polonius, however, is absolutely certain, and he says, you can cut my head off if you think it's not true. But the king wants a little more proof, so Polonius says, I have a brilliant idea. We'll sit Ophelia out here while he's walking by, and we'll be hiding behind an arras, a curtain, and watching what happens to see how they interact. Polonius is the most obnoxious little spy ever. In fact, we're getting into the spy versus spy area of the book Hamlet. We're going to find that everyone is really spying on everyone else. Polonius was spying on his son, Polonius wants to spy on Hamlet and his daughter. In any case, at this point, the king and queen retire and Polonius decides to chat with Hamlet. And so we move into a conversation between Polonius and Hamlet. The majority of this conversation is Hamlet dancing linguistically around Polonius. Clever statements that sound kind of crazy, but are also just subtle burns. Polonius can't follow him at all, and looks like a buffoon the whole time. For example, when Polonius asks what he's reading, Hamlet says, words, words, words. And when Polonius tries to clarify what the matter is that Hamlet is reading, Hamlet pretends like he thinks that he's talking about an argument between people. And finally, when Hamlet does discuss what he's reading, he uses it as a way of mocking Polonius's old age. Polonius, who's very confused, says, though this be madness, yet there is method in it. He noticed that no matter how crazy Hamlet seems to be, He also makes a kind of sense. How pregnant sometimes his replies are, a happiness that often madness hits on, which reason and sanity could not so preposterously be delivered of. Polonius presumes that Hamlet is just saying things crazily, and sometimes the crazy things that he says just make a kind of sense. But really it seems that Hamlet is mostly just getting away with making fun of Polonius. Polonius dismisses himself by saying, "My lord, I will take my leave of you." And Hamlet replies, "You cannot take from me anything that I will not more willingly part withal, except my life, except my life, except my life. There's nothing I'd rather you take away. Well, except for my life." Enter Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to chat with Hamlet, and the two old friends come up and try to buddy it up with poor Hamlet. At first, Hamlet seems happy to see them, but pretty quickly he sees through their stiff facades and fake answers. They have a little conversation about the Wheel of Fortune, how they are not on the button of her cap or on the soles of her feet. In other words, they're not at the very best of fortune nor at the very worst, they're somewhere around the middle. They're a little too happy and a little too positive. And Hamlet begins to get suspicious. When they say that the world's grown honest for their news, Hamlet says, "Then is doomsday near, but your news is not true. Let me question more in particular. What have you, my good friends, deserved at the hands of fortune that she send you to prison hither?" Hamlet talks about how awful it is to live in Denmark, again, a symptom of his depression. But Rosencrantz and Guildenstern keep trying to be extra perky. "But Denmark's such a nice prison! It's such a nice place! Surely it's just your ambition. You just need a bigger scope for yourself, don't you, Hammy?" Hamlet replies, "Oh God, I could be bounded in a nutshell and count myself a king of infinite space, were it not that I have bad dreams." It's not his ambition that's the problem, it's his own mind. He also says the wonderful line, "There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so." He recognizes the problem is really within himself. He's got a whole lot of inner chaos going on, and that's not something he's going to open up to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Finally, he presses them to tell him why they're in Elsinore. They say, "We're just here to visit you." And Hamlet says, "No, you were sent for, weren't you?" They keep trying to deny it, but there's no denying it. They're too honest. And finally they're like, "What do we say to him?" And Hamlet, because he knows that they've been sent for by the king or queen, he knows that they're spies of the king or queen now, moves on to tell them why they've been sent for, in a wonderful description of his depression. "I have of late, but wherefore I know not, lost all my mirth, forgone all custom of exercises, and indeed it goes so heavily with my disposition, that this goodly frame, the earth, seems to be a sterile promontory. The most excellent canopy, the air. Look you, this brave o'erhanging firmament, this majestical roof, fretted with golden fire. Why, it appeareth nothing to me but a foul and pestilent congregation of vapors. What a piece of work is man! How noble in reason, how infinite in faculties, in form and moving, how express and admirable in action, how like an angel in apprehension, how like a god, the beauty of the world, the paragon of animals, and yet, to me, what is this quintessence of dust? Man delights not me." He notes the beauty and the richness of the world around him, but also notes that he can't enjoy it. He's full of misery and agony over it all. And the human being, the wonder of humanity. Here we are in the Renaissance, the pinnacle of humanism, and Hamlet can't appreciate any of that. Nothing really matters when you're tainted by depression. Rosencrantz brings up the fact that there's a bunch of actors who are coming into Elsinore, and they're probably going to get a pretty bad reception, considering how dark Hamlet's feeling right now. But actually, the reference to the actors perks Hamlet up. He's rather excited to hear about them. They have a bit of theater discussion talking about the livelihood of actors, which was probably pretty important on Shakespeare's mind. How this particular acting troupe has been booted out of the major towns because of a young troupe of boys that are singing for money. And since only so many acting troupes are allowed in town at one time, this troupe has to go on the road. Hamlet, as he's turning to greet the players, and Polonius, who's coming to introduce the players, says one more greeting to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. "Gentlemen, you are welcome to Elsinore. Your hands. Come then, the appurtenance of welcome is fashion and ceremony. Let me comply with you in this garb, lest my extent to the players, which I tell you must show fairly outwards, should be more appear like entertainment than yours. You are welcome. But my uncle father and my aunt mother are deceived." And Guildenstern says, "In what, my dear lord?" "I am but mad north-northwest. When the wind is southerly, I know a hawk from a handsaw." So Hamlet renews his greeting one more time to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, treating them as friends even though he already knows that they're spies. But he also points out to them that he's only mad north-northwest. There are times when he's perfectly lucid. This could indicate that he's only pretending to be mad and really does understand everything that's going on. Or that his madness comes and goes. Maybe he has more sense than his uncle and mother give him credit for. He does a little rub about his uncle, father, and aunt mother. That's awkward. Polonius comes in to introduce the players and acts as a buffoon as always. The best actors in the world, either for tragedy, comedy, history, pastoral, pastoral comical, historical comical, tragical comical, historical pastoral, scene indivisible, or poem unlimited. And Hamlet, as usual, is mocking Polonius in his witty way. Hamlet meets the players with a warm welcome because these are players he knew from the past. In fact, he's familiar with a lot of their works. And he comes to the first player and asks him for a particular speech that he really loved. Hamlet, in fact, likes the speech so much that he jumps in and begins to quote several lines of it before he catches himself and allows the player to speak it. The player begins and speaks a long speech about Priam's murder in the city of Troy, Priam, king of Troy. We have an interesting layout. Here we have a player who's standing there without a stage, without a scenery, and just giving an impassioned speech from a particular play. We have multiple people observing it. We have Polonius, who doesn't appreciate good art, and who interrupts to comment on the quality of the play in a moment. We have Hamlet, who is very enthusiastic about this and drinking it all in. And just like when you go to the theater with a really obnoxious person who makes snide comments about the movie the whole time, Hamlet's getting really annoyed at Polonius. But then the player moves in his speech from the death of King Priam to Queen Hecuba and her response to the death of her husband. And as he's speaking it, tears spring up into his eyes. Polonius and Hamlet calm the man down and ask him to finish the speech later. Hamlet, enthusiastic for the well-being of the players, asks Polonius to take good care of them and to put them up in a good place. And Polonius says, "I'll give them what they deserve." Hamlet is enraged by this and says, "God's bodkin, man, much better. Use every man after his desert, and who shall scape whipping? Use them after your own honor and dignity. The less they deserve, the more merit is in your bounty. Take them in." Who deserves good treatment? Really none of us. And especially Hamlet's had the vision that no one is any good in this life. Hamlet also makes a point of asking the players as they're retiring to give him a particular performance, and also he asks if he can add a few lines in there. We'll see why in a moment. We come to the end of Act 2 with our second soliloquy, and this soliloquy is Hamlet in response to the player's speech. "Now I am alone. Oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I! Is it not monstrous that this player here, but in a fiction, in a dream of passion, could force his soul so to his own conceit that from her working all his visage waned, tears in his eyes, distraction in his aspect, a broken voice, his whole function suiting with forms to his conceit, and all for nothing, for Hecuba? What's Hecuba to him, or he to her, that he should weep for her? What would he do had he the motive and cue for passion that I have? He would drown the stage in tears, and cleave the general ear with horrid speech, make mad the guilty and appall the free, confound the ignorant and amaze indeed the very faculties of eyes and ears. Yet I, a dull and muddy-mettled rascal, peak like a jot of dreams, unpregnant of my cause, and can say nothing. No, not for a king upon whose property and most dear life a damned defeat was made. Am I a coward? Who calls me villain, breaks my pate across, plucks my beard and blows it in my face, tweaks me by the nose and gives me the lie of the throat as deep as to the lungs? Who does me this? Ah, swoons! I should take it, for it cannot be but I am pigeon-livered and lack gall to make oppression bitter. Or ere this I should have fatted all the regions kikes with this slave's awful bloody body. Villain, remorseless, treacherous, lecherous, kindless villain! Why, what an ass am I! This is most brave that I, the son of dear father murdered, prompted to my revenge by heaven and hell, must like a whore unpack my heart with words, and fall a cursing like a very drab a scullion. Fie upon it, foe, about my brains. In this first half, Hamlet beats himself up for not having done anything yet to avenge his father's murder. And he's especially pricked to the heart by what he sees in this actor. This actor can be so worked up by the death of a fictional character in a book. I don't know if you've ever cried over a character in a movie or a book when something awful happened to them, but they weren't real. And yet here Hamlet is with a dead father, with a murderous uncle, with a treacherous mother, and he can't bring himself to do anything about it. All he does is sit around and cry. Depression is something that really debilitates. Hamlet is perfectly willing to beat himself up, but it's awfully hard to step up and do the thing he's been asked to do. But then he turns in the second half of the soliloquy. I have heard that guilty creatures sitting at a play have by the very cunning of the scene been struck so to the soul that presently they proclaimed their malefactions. For murder, though it have no tongue, will speak with most miraculous organ. I'll have these players play something like the murder of my father before mine uncle. I'll observe his looks, I'll tint him to the quick. If I do but blench, then I know my course. The spirit that I have seen may be the devil, and the devil hath power to assume a pleasing shape, yea, and perhaps out of my weakness and my melancholy, as he is very potent and with such spirits, abuses me to damn me. I'll have grounds more relative than this. The play's the thing, wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king. So Hamlet, when he's finally done beating himself up about not murdering his uncle yet, instead of rushing out to kill his uncle, says, but you know what? Maybe that ghost of my dad wasn't really my dad. Maybe it's an evil spirit sent to trick me. How can I be sure? So before he does what he knows he should do, before he does this job that's been burdening him and weighing on his shoulders, he comes up with another elaborate stalling plan, which is to put on a play that looks just like the murder of his father and watch his uncle and see if he reacts. That way he'll know for sure that he needs to kill his uncle. Sort of like knowing you have a giant test to study for, and instead of actually studying the vocab words you need to for the test, you spend all of your time cutting index cards to make flashcards for that. Yep, I'm getting ready. Well, good luck with that, Hamlet. I hope the play goes well. We'll find out in Act 3. Thanks again for watching. If you'd like to watch another video, either Act 1 or Act 3, you can click on one of the videos linked here, or you can click on my little icon to subscribe. And I'll see you next time.
So, I listened to my dad and he said not to talk to my boyfriend anymore, and then my boyfriend started acting all crazy, and then my dad said it was my fault, and then he read all my love letters to the king, and it was super embarrassing, and then they used me as bait.